It's such a pleasure for me to welcome Carolyn Parkhurst for her newest novel, Harmony. Carolyn is the author of 3 previous novels, Lost and Found, the Nobodies Album, and the New York Times bestselling The Dogs of Babel, and a children's book, Cooking with Henry and Ellie Belly. In her newest, Harmony, she tells the story of the Hammond family, whose lives are changed by a desperate attempt to help their brilliant but undiagnosable daughter, Tilly. Carolyn achieves an impressive and delicate balance in Harmony, navigating the tightrope through dark humor, suspense, and genuine emotional struggle. The moments of parental worry and searching are devastatingly real. It's impossible not to connect to something in these pages. Please do help me welcome Carolyn Parkhurst to Politics and Prose.
Hi. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm so pleased and honored to see you all here. I am going to talk about Harmony. It is a book that took me almost 5 years to write, which is longer than any of my other books, and it was harder to write than any of my other books for a variety of reasons. So I am especially excited and grateful to see it published and out in the world. There are 3 narrators in Harmony. There's the mother of the family, Alexandra, and there's her daughter, Iris, her younger daughter, the one who is not undiagnosable or on the autism spectrum, however you want to look at it. But Tilly herself, who's sort of at the center of everything, she also narrates small little bits from time to time. So I'm going to read just a few sections from the beginning of the novel, and I want to give you sort of a taste of all 3 narrators. So first is the prologue, which is narrated by Alexandra, the mother. In another world, you make it work. In another world, you never even hear the name Scott Bean. Or you do, and you maybe even subscribe to his newsletter, but on the night that he comes to speak at a library not far from your house, Iris is sent home from school with a stomach bug, or Josh is out of town and you don't want to hire a sitter. You figure you'll catch him next time. Later, when you hear his name on the news and it sounds familiar, you shake your head and think, what a wacko. It doesn't even occur to you to say that could have been me, because you know yourself, and it goes without saying. You would never get mixed up in something like that. End of story. Chapter 1, Iris, June 3rd, 2012, New Hampshire. The camp is in New Hampshire. We've been driving for 2 days now. Well, not literally, because we stopped at a hotel overnight, and we've taken breaks to eat and go to the bathroom, but you know what I mean. We've been driving for 2 days approximately, and I can't decide if I want to be there already or not. Tilly and I are both sitting in the middle row. She's behind our dad, and I'm behind our mom, because the way back is all full of our bags and suitcases and everything. It looks like a lot, but it really isn't, not for moving someplace completely new. For a while last week, Tilly got really obsessed with the idea that we could rent a U-Haul, and she was even looking at prices and showing my parents all of these websites and Yelp reviews and stuff, but she couldn't get them to say yes. They kept saying the whole point is to simplify, to figure out the bare minimum we need to live. I don't think that is the whole point, though, because we could have done that and stayed in D.C. Tilly was mad at me earlier this afternoon, but she's over it now. One good thing about her is that even though she gets mad pretty often, it doesn't last long. Okay, so for practically the whole day, she's been bugging my parents about stopping to see the place where the old man of the mountain used to be. Yes, used to be. Tilly has this whole weird thing about big statues, or big people, actually. That's what she calls them, because they don't have to be statues. And in fact, this is an example of one that wasn't. The old man of the mountain was this piece of rock that used to be there on the side of the mountain jutting out, and it kind of looked like an old guy's face. Tilly showed me pictures, and it's on the New Hampshire State Quarter. It's cool, but not that cool. And then one night, it fell off the mountain. It just collapsed and broke, and the pieces rolled down onto the road below. It happened in 2003 on May 3rd, and I know the date because it was Tilly's 4th birthday. Not that she would have known about it at the time, but she acts like it's some big mystical thing instead of sort of an interesting coincidence. So now, 9 years later, here we are in New Hampshire, and the mountain is still there, but that's all it is, a mountain. No face on it, no big person. But Tilly wanted to go look at it, and after a million hours of begging, my mom and dad finally agreed. So we pulled off the road, and Tilly got out and walked up to the fence and stared up at the empty space like it was amazing, like it was a place where something holy and sacred had happened. I can't believe that it was there and now it's gone, she said. I can't believe I'm never going to get to see it. It's like the Colossus of Rhodes and the Bamiyan Buddhas. She looked like she might start crying. And I mean, this is our one big stop on the way to the camp. We'd been passing all these billboards for places that sounded amazing. An alpine slide, Weir's Beach, and a western ghost town place where you can get your face put on a wanted poster. And instead, Tilly gets her way and we stop to look at something that isn't even there. So while she was going on and on with her random facts, and Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote this story about it called The Great Stone Face, I just cleared my throat and said really loudly, it was just a piece of rock. It worked. Tilly got mad instantly. 0 to 60 is what my mom calls it, and made a move like she was going to hit me as hard as she could. I shrank down and pressed into my mom's side, and my dad grabbed Tilly's hand. Guys, said my mom, come on. Tilly, you don't hit your sister, ever, no matter how mad you are. Iris, this is important to Tilly. Stop putting it down. Fucking fuck, Tilly said, enough under her breath that my parents let it go. I just walked away like I was super calm and totally above that kind of behavior, even though the whole time I was continuing the conversation in my head. This is the most boring tourist thing ever. Let's go look at some air. You know those falling rock signs you see on the highway? That's the exact same thing. Get your cameras out. But after I stopped being angry, I felt bad for making fun of this thing she likes so much. So when I went into the visitor center to use the bathroom, I bought her a postcard in the gift shop. Now it's like a half hour later, and we're driving right through a forest, or at least that's what it seems like. I didn't even know there were roads that went through forests. I thought it was all like hiking trails and people camping. I can't decide if it feels cozy or spooky. Everywhere you look, every window, nothing but pine trees. It feels like a fairy tale, but the beginning part that's a little bit scary because you don't know what the characters are going to find. It feels like we're the only people on Earth. So that is Iris, and she is 11, and she's Tilly's younger sister, and she loves her sister, but she's a little bit resentful about being uprooted to move out into the middle of nowhere for something that is clearly meant as sort of a treatment for her sister and not for her. Now, Iris's storyline tells the present, the current day story of what's going on once they get to the camp. Alexandra's story tells the past, the events leading up to that. So chapter 2 is Alexandra, March 2007, so 5 years earlier, Washington, D.C. You open the basement door, feeling as if you're setting out on an Arctic expedition. It's your job to go down there and sort through the chaos. It's your job to find clothes for your family. All of your laundry is in garbage bags. You have bed bugs, and the first step in containing the infestation has been to seal up every item of clothing you own. Blankets, too, and stuffed animals, anything with a soft surface. Dirty items have to be washed and dried. Clean ones just have to go through the dryer where the heat is high enough to kill the bugs. When the man from the pest control company came, he got down on the floor next to the couch and ripped open a side panel, pulling the fabric away from the board underneath. Yeah, he said, pointing without touching. See this here? You bent your head close and squinted until you saw a cluster of tiny brown specks. That's their feces. He was very well informed, this guy. He was a font of fascinating bedbug trivia. White people tend to be sensitive to it, so we're able to catch it early, he told you. He was black, which somehow made it seem more okay for him to be saying these things. Hispanics, it doesn't bother them till it gets really bad. I go in there and I find the bugs in the wall sconces, in the closets, everywhere. By the time they call me, you can see the bugs with the naked eye. You glanced at Tilly, who was listening with interest, quiet for once, no doubt filing this away in some confusing, overstuffed race folder in her head. Your best guess is that you brought the bugs home from a hotel where you stayed last Thanksgiving. A nice place, apparently clean. The kids loved the free breakfast buffet. It's like a metaphor come to life, your home polluted with invaders you can't even see. And what if, you suppose that this is the real source of anxiety for most people, what if the invasion goes even deeper than that? You've been to the fringe parenting websites and the homeopathy section at Whole Foods. You know that there are people out there who will tell you that it's too late, that our bodies are already tainted, that we're overrun with mucus or bacteria or spreading fungal growth. You picture a garden gone to seed, moss growing on the surface of our spleens, vines squeezing our kidneys, tiny mushrooms spreading across the linings of our intestines. Kudzu, unstoppable, choking us from the inside. Has depression ever been this widespread? Or autism, or infertility, or food allergies? Something's changed, even if it's just our own method of record keeping. Impossible to say what might be causing what. You've been thinking about this a lot during this dismal spring. So far, the year's key events, the ones you grimly imagine decorating with exclamation points and inserting into your next Christmas card letter, are the bedbug colonization and the new diagnosis you've received for Tilly. You've had a few false starts. OCD, ADHD, an autoimmune disorder called PANDAS, which you think about almost nostalgically every time you take the kids to see Mei Xiang and Tian Tian at the zoo. But in early February, you finally made it to the top of the waiting list of a highly recommended developmental pediatrician, and the diagnosis she bestowed on Tilly carries a weight that the others didn't. The new set of letters, the acronym you attach to your daughter like a degree she's earned, is PDD-NOS. It stands for Pervasive Developmental Disorder Not Otherwise Specified, and it doesn't actually mean a whole lot. It's a diagnosis of exclusion, nothing more than the doctors throwing up their hands and saying, something's going on here, but we can't say exactly what. But it's located firmly on the autism spectrum, and it has the effect of shifting all the pieces on the game board, sliding Tilly into an entirely new position. And you're still trying to figure out what kind of endgame it might lead you to. You tug at the knot on the bag of Iris's clothes. Finally, it's occurred to you to use clear plastic bags, which makes it easier to find things. As you rummage, you're careful not to put any of the clean clothing down on any surface. The pest control people haven't done their second spray yet, and who knows where the parasites may still be lurking. It's all safe for humans, the man had said about the chemicals, the man who seemed to know everything about bugs and their habits. Humans and pets are fine, but you don't believe it for a minute. When you were pregnant with Tilly, you subscribed to an online pregnancy calendar. Each morning you'd turn on your computer and learn which organs were likely to be forming today, which cells might be fusing even as you sat there at your desk. You'd send Josh emails about it at work. This week, the brainstem, what should I eat? But it was a joke, because it was all going to be okay. You didn't actually believe it could matter much. Women have been doing this forever, right, without this kind of second-by-second scrutiny? May 3rd, 1999. Matilda Grace comes into the world at 7:25 p.m. Pregnancy and birth normal, although later you'll wonder whether that's true. You'll struggle to remember details that seemed inconsequential at the time. Did you drink tap water? Did you eat any fish that might have contained high levels of mercury? Having a baby is something that never changes, has never changed in the history of the world, and also something that changes all the time. The advice you got from doctors and baby care manuals was cutting edge and up to date. It was also completely different from the advice Josh's older sister had gotten 5 years earlier, and the advice younger friends were given 5 years later. You know that when you were a baby, you were put to sleep on your tummy, like most babies of your generation. It was thought to be safer to prevent choking if you spit up while you were unattended. Your nephew, born in 1995, was placed to sleep on his side, an ungainly position for an infant and one that required a foam crib insert to keep him from toppling one way or the other. By the time Tilly was born, it was imperative that you lay her down on her back. No pillows or blankets, though swaddling was encouraged. No soft toys that have button eyes or pom-pom noses. And you suppose it worked. Neither of your babies died from SIDS. But who knows what they'll be told, Tilly and Iris, when it's their turn to bend over a cradle and place a wriggling baby down to sleep. Did you color your hair while you were pregnant? Did you take any over-the-counter medications? By the time you were ready to get rid of the crib that held each of your babies safely for 2 years apiece, the mechanism that moved the side up and down had already been rejected as too dangerous. You couldn't get any charity to take it or any pregnant friend. You were advised to break it into pieces before putting it out for bulk trash collection so that it couldn't be appropriated by a passerby and used for some new baby who might not survive its outdated design. How well did you wash your fruits and vegetables? How much coffee did you drink? If you look at the long history of women having babies, there's no right or wrong. There's no universal truth. You think about women in the 19th century told that if they should happen to gaze upon anything gruesome or horrifying, their babies would be born deformed. Of course, that's ridiculous, right? Did you eat any soft cheeses or sushi? Do you have lead fillings in your teeth? Now, with more than a century of extra wisdom and confusion under your belt, you're not so sure anything can be ruled out. A crisis of faith doesn't have to be about God. You can have a crisis of faith about dust mites and food additives that cause behavioral changes, pesticides in fruit salad and insect husks in peanut butter, mysterious rashes caused by something you brought home in a suitcase. There's a startling fact that you read somewhere. After airbags became standard in cars, statisticians noticed that the incidence of severe leg injuries increased dramatically. Think about it for a minute. Why should that be? Is there something about the way airbags inflate during collision that targets the passenger's legs, makes them more vulnerable? No, it's a matter of checks and balances. Before airbags, there were certain accidents that would have killed you. You'd be a corpse in the morgue and no one would be paying any attention to your legs. When we change the way we do things, the way we shop for groceries or take care of our children or protect ourselves from harm, we set other changes in motion for good or for ill. and it may be years before we figure out what we've done. You cried in the parking lot of the doctor's office after that last meeting with the developmental pediatrician, the one where she broke her news so gently and so kindly. And you continued to cry off and on for weeks. You grieve, that's the conventional wisdom. You grieve for the child you thought you were going to have, though maybe it's also for the parent you thought you'd be. But soon, or so you keep hearing, you'll find that having an answer provides some measure of relief, because now you understand why she acts the way she does. You understand that some problems are neither your fault nor hers. You can begin to educate yourself. It's hard to use Google if you don't have the proper search terms. You can learn what kind of help your child needs, and you can find other people in the same boat. Eventually, you'll feel less alone. A diagnosis, the conventional wisdom goes, is a beginning rather than an end. You're not quite there yet, though, to that place of clarity and relief. Now that you have the all-important label, the letters that will make your daughter eligible for the ominous-sounding set of benefits known as services, OT and PT and plain old T, now that you've gotten an answer that's supposed to be definitive, what are you supposed to do about it? There doesn't seem to be much of a consensus. Just one more week until the pest control people come to finish their treatment, and then all this will be over. The day they come to spray, you'll stay in a hotel just like you did the first time. It's money through your fingers and not fun for anyone. The four of you crammed into one room, waking up in strange beds on a school day. But it's better than putting your kids down for the night on mattresses still damp with pesticides. Better than bringing them home before you've had a chance to sweep up the white powder that settles on the floor as the toxic mist dries in the air. You collect pieces of clothing, keeping track as you go. Underwear for yourself, a shirt for Tilly. Denim legs twirled in the corners of bed sheets, spun tight by the movements of the dryer. You pull like you're playing tug of war at a picnic. Josh's clothes are in here too, mixed in with the rest, but you don't take any of them out for him. He can find his own. There was a time, you remember with some astonishment, when you used to do nice things for him on purpose. It's sad, and maybe you'll reach that point again, but it's not going to be now. You have a feeling of plague and panic like you're living through the Black Death or the influenza epidemic of 1918. In plague days, you're learning, it's every man for himself. I am, you think, and I want, and you have no idea how either sentence ends. So that's Alexandra, and the last very short bit I'm going to read is Tilly. If Iris narrates the present and Alexandra narrates the past, Tilly sort of narrates the future, although it's less of a coherent narrative. All of her pieces are marked Tilly, date and location unknown. At an unspecified moment in the future, in imaginary museums all across the country, the world tour of Hammond family artifacts is a wild success. Advance tickets are required. There are lines out the door in every city. Timelines are posted throughout the exhibit space to help visitors place the display objects within the context of major Hammond family events. Josh and Alexandra Hammond meet in 1992 and are married in 1995. Matilda Grace, known as Tilly, arrives in 1999, and her sister Iris Victoria is born in 2001. In 2010, Alexandra makes the acquaintance of Scott Bean, founder of an organization called Harmonious Parenting. In June of 2012, the family leaves their home in Washington, D.C. to help Scott Bean establish a family camp in Laconia, New Hampshire. Some of the items on display are fanciful or beautiful, but many of them intrigue just by virtue of their ordinariness. Father's Day card, June 2006. Washable Crayola markers on bright white 20-pound paper. Fourth grade report on one of the 13 colonies, Delaware, by Matilda Hammond, age 10. Signatures written by each family member with his or her non-dominant hand. Autumn 2009. American Girl doll Samantha, nail polish on cheeks and lips added post-manufacture by Iris Hammond, age 6. Notes to a new babysitter, Alexandra Hammond, 2005. Reusable grocery bag filled with Tilly's drawings, 2006 through 7 academic year. Primitive art, dating back to the dawn of the Hammonds as we know them. A 6-minute film entitled Early Days, A Disaster in the Making, shows on a continuous loop. It includes footage from Josh and Alexandra's wedding and home movies of the girls singing songs and playing in an inflatable wading pool. Museum guests are invited to peer through the windows of the non-working 1971 Ford Galaxy that Josh Hammond kept in the garage of the family's Washington, D.C. home, and that the girls adopted as an unconventional playroom. They are led single file through a full-size recreation of the cabin the family inhabited after moving to Scott Bean's compound. When something cataclysmic has happened, an event that decimates an entire way of life, Historians find it useful to look at what remains. These people we're trying to understand. How did they celebrate a marriage or the birth of a baby? How did they honor their dead? More prosaically, how did they prepare their meat for cooking? What methods did they use for washing their clothes or sharing news of recent events? What did they hold on to, and what did they throw away? We don't have much, pieces of their weapons maybe, fragments of their dishes, but they tell us a story we wouldn't otherwise know. Press a button to light me up like a museum diorama. Here are her hands, the plaque on the wall will say. Here is her beating heart. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have.
I've read your book, and I think it's just great. I wanted to ask you if Tilly ever took any stimulants. Somehow, maybe you mentioned at one time something about her medications, but you never explained what medications. And so I wonder if you can expound on the use of stimulants for kids with this problem. For instance, 11 to 12 million kids in the US are taking these stimulants. And my question is, do you know something about the long-term effect of these stimulants on children? And the second question is, do you know if the children ever outgrow this sort of funny kind of behavior?
Thank you. I approached writing the novel from the point of view of, a parent. I have a child who's on the autism spectrum, and also as a fiction writer, but not as, a researcher. I think there's like one place where it mentions that, or a couple of places where it mentions that Tilly is taking medication, but it doesn't go into any detail. And I guess that was just something I didn't really explore very fully. I think a lot of kids are put on various medications, and some help and some don't, and it's really hard to do all the fine tuning. As for whether they grow out of it, it's hard to say. Some do much better once they reach adulthood, but some do not. There's sort of a saying, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. There's like a huge amount of variation, and if you're bringing in other labels and diagnoses, then that's even more true.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi.
I was wondering how much pop culture informs your writing.
Well, probably a lot. I sort of love pop culture, I consume much of it while I'm writing or supposed to be writing, but, it fits in interesting ways. There's one part where Alexandra and Josh are having a date night and they're fighting, and Alexandra sort of reflects about all of the shared references that they have that kind of help bring them back together when they're feeling like too far apart. So, I think pop culture is an interesting thing to explore, and it affects all of us, and I guess that's all I have to say.
I love the use of the second person in Alexandra's section, and I wondered if you had any thoughts about using why you made that choice and working with that point of view, which can be very tricky.
Yes, thank you. I remember that I had one writing teacher in college who said you can never write anything in the second person, and to a writer that's like a challenge. I used the second person because I really wanted Alexandra's sections to be very intimate, and for the reader to be very close to her and what she's describing, what's going on with her. And I was sort of trying to mirror like the voice we all have in our own heads that can be very harsh. No one is a harsher critic on Alexandra than Alexandra is. She's very hard on herself about a lot of things. But also, just so the reader sort of feels in a more visceral way the chaos in her life that eventually is what leads her to feel desperate enough that she's willing to consider something as radical as giving up her home and her possessions and moving, following some guy she just met, a leader, a parenting guru, to camp in the woods.
Hi.
Hi.
I've read all your books up to this one. They're all amazing, including Henry and Ellie Belly.
Thank you.
It's a good book. Very funny. Anyway, you mentioned when you first got up here that this was your most difficult book to write and that it took you 5 years. So I wanted to ask why.
Well, for many reasons. There were, part of it is just real life gets in the way, and there were various real life things that, would stop me writing for a while, and then it's hard to get back into it. A lot of it had to do with the material being very personal. I sort of struggled with, like I said, my son has Asperger's, and so a lot, this is very much fiction, and like I made the character female in the book almost to remind myself, like, don't conflate everything too closely, but I did take a lot of inspiration from my own experience raising my son. And, and thinking about her sister Iris, I thought a lot about my daughter who, is the sibling of someone who sort of has all these issues. So, I just worried about it. I sort of worried, is it okay to be writing about my kids? And, are they going to hate me for it one day? And or will they never even read any of my books, which is like a totally separate worry. But, most writers would tell you turn all that off when you're trying to write, but it's very hard to do that. And all of these kinds of worries sort of chip away and make it hard to sit down and just do the work. So that's the main reason.
I had a question about the creation of the autistic voice, because I know that must have been a challenge. And were you inspired by different portrayals in literature that you had read of that voice? And are there some that you thought were inaccurate or not as true?
Well, I wasn't sure at first that those were Tilly's voice. I was writing these odd pieces that I thought fit in somewhere. And I was sort of thinking about, Tilly is very interested in big statues, which are in many cases memorials. And she's, interested in this process where history remembers certain people and forgets others. And like, why isn't her ordinary family or anybody's ordinary family important enough to get like a statue built to them or whatever? And so I started, thinking about the ways that we memorialize history and kind of adapting them to be about a family. There's another one where she imagines a historical recreation society where they act out scenes from the family's life. And, I was just kind of the main thing was letting my mind and my imagination just kind of go as free as I could make it. One thing that I've found from having a child on the autism spectrum is his mind is incredible. It's like not like anyone else's mind that I've ever met. And he's very, very imaginative and creative. And none of this was like anything he had ever said or, his interests are different. But I was sort of trying to honor that and trying to make those pieces as sort of big and interesting in that way as possible.
Thank you.
Hey, Carolyn. Hi. How are you?
Good.
As I know, and I hope everyone will discover, you are extremely funny on social media. She's one of the best tweeters out there. And my question isn't actually about how that influences you directly, but it's about how it helps you connect with your readers and how you feel about how being on different platforms from Twitter to Facebook to the list has helped you get out there and talk to people, and if there is good about it and bad as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My first book came out in 2003 and things were very different then. There was no Facebook, there was no Twitter. And writers weren't expected to quite the same extent to market their own books and promote themselves and all of that. Nowadays, it's kind of required. If you have a publicist, they will tell you, you want to get on social media, you want people to, you know, you want to build an audience. But the thing is, nobody wants to follow you on Twitter if all you do is advertise your books. You know, no one wants like a commercial, you know, and that would be boring anyway. But, you know, I've met, you know, some great people through social media. I'm very sporadic at it, but, you know, I actually find that it can help inspire my creativity. If I'm trying to figure out the right way to phrase a particularly funny idea I have for a tweet, which I probably spend longer on than, you know, you're supposed to, but, you know, say I spend 20 minutes on a tweet or something, not every tweet, but you're going to go look at them and say, oh, well, that one did not take 20 minutes, you know. But it can actually help me sort of get into the right frame of mind to then go sit down and write. So, yes, thank you.
Hi. I wanted to ask you about throughout your books, you write in many different voices. So you have 3 different voices in this book. In Lost and Found, you write from the different characters. In Nobodies Album, we have glimpses of a lot of different novels. And I'm just curious about the process that you follow when you do that. Do you write a character entirely and then move to another character, or do you jump around? And how does that happen?
Thanks. I tend to write more or less in order of the book. I write chapter 1 and chapter 2, and there's a lot of going back and, you know, revising and whatever. But, you know, I like writing from different points of view because you can get different ways of looking at the same story, and ideally the reader will know things that none of the characters quite know, you know. The thing I liked about writing from the point of view of an 11-year-old in Iris, I mean, it's challenging, and I'm not, you know, entirely sure that she always sounds like an 11-year-old, but, you know, the thing is, kids notice totally different things than adults do. And, you know, there are things that she might pick up on that her parents won't, and also things that she might not pick up on that the reader will if there's something creepy going on. You know, kids accept a lot at face value, and adult readers might not. So, you know, I write the pieces as they come in the book and just think about the ways they bounce off each other and how this person, what are they seeing that this person is not.
Hello. I loved what you read. And one of the things that I really love, I can't wait to read this book, and one of the things I loved that you read was if someone has a healthy baby, they don't say, what did you do to make that healthy baby? But the second that there's an aberration, that checklist of the mom's fault kicks in, which you so beautifully and anxiety-producingly captured. And I guess I'm interested in that, in writing about that anxiety of everything that can go wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we live in a time when people are much more anxious about things like child rearing than they ever were before. And we worry about every little thing, you know, like I remember when my son was a baby, like I was in a baby group with someone who was worried their baby hadn't grown teeth. And it's like, I am really sure she's going to grow teeth. You know, I've never heard of that not happening, you know? But when there's something more, you know, complicated and troubling going on, then you know, I think it's human nature for parents to wonder if they could have prevented it, what they did wrong, you know, and there's no way of teasing that apart. You'll never know, you know. But that doesn't mean, you know, you don't go through it endlessly in your head. So with Alexandra, I just wanted to, you know, I didn't want it to be like her constantly whining and complaining, but I really did want to look at the ways that she, you know, turns everything that she encounters, she turns it back into herself and tries to figure out, you know, why did she make it, how did she make it happen, and what could she have done differently. And I think that's, you know, I think a lot of people do that kind of thing.
I have a question. Well, first I want to say congratulations. This book is getting, so many great things are happening. It's gotten so much wonderful praise, and it deserves every word. So I couldn't be happier for you and for the book. I'm curious, everybody's been asking my questions, but this is one that I'm actually going to get in. I'm just curious about the Scott Bean character. Can you tell us a little bit about how he came to be, and
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, thank you. So Scott Bean is the one he's like a self-styled parenting guru. He doesn't have any kids of his own. He doesn't really have like credentials, you know. You know, when I put it like that, he doesn't really sound like someone you'd follow into the woods, you know. But the thing is, the things he says make a lot of sense on the surface. He says maybe we should get our kids away from electronics. Maybe we should, be paying attention to what we're eating and putting in our kids' bodies and so forth. And it's stuff that I think, in moderation, a lot of people would look at and say, yeah, that makes sense. And you can see why someone who's vulnerable, as Alexandra is, might get pulled in. But once they get to the camp, spoiler alert, things get not quite so rosy. And, he's a little less stable than he originally sort of presents himself. He was the hardest character for me to write because he wasn't based on anybody. And, it's sort of, it's an open question. Is Camp Harmony a cult or is it not? But I was thinking a lot about cults. And, he's very charismatic. He had to be someone that people would believably follow. But, I didn't want to make him, I went through several drafts where he was too clearly like a villain, and then like I made him too nice and it was like boring, So he was the hardest one to get the balance of. And, interestingly, I'm like a really non-visual person, so I have trouble describing what my characters look like. For a long time, I had him having red hair, and it just was not. When I changed his hair color, things fell into place. There you go. That's my secret. Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a greedy fan, but have you started your next book, or do you have an idea for your next book?
I have not, but thank you. No, I mean, I have some ideas, but I feel like my brain is empty when I finish writing a book, and my first 2 books, I had babies like immediately afterward, and that was really great. I had to take time off. I did not decide to keep having babies with every book. But I still feel like I need some time to sort of fill up the well, as you say. So hopefully not too long. Hopefully the next one won't take me as long to write, but no, sorry. Yeah.
Hey, Carolyn.
Hey.
So tell us a little bit about how you work. How do you get writing? I gather from my daily listen of Garrison Keillor on NPR that a recurring theme on the Writer's Almanac is writing is really hard work. And I'm a really bad writer, and I don't find it that difficult. So, but what you've just read is so lovely. How do you get through 5 years of what you describe to be sort of a slog, but that comes out so beautiful?
Well, thank you. Something I'm really good at giving writing advice and not so good at taking it myself, but something I always tell like new beginning writers is you have to write through the bad to get to the good. And, especially if you're writing about some huge topic that's been done to death, like love, falling in love, losing someone you love, having a baby, all these things that like there are Hallmark cards for, your brain starts in the place of the Hallmark cards. And like you just have to write through it and then get rid of everything that is terrible, So there's a lot of like, I get like a glimpse of a phrase and I write it down and then I try to fill in everything around it, and a lot of it just, I have to, throw it away. But, the most important thing is, and I don't always do this either, is just keep writing, don't give up, and just trust that, I get kind of panicky if I spend like a few days writing and none of it's good and none of it's, I have to sort of trust that it will eventually kind of catch fire and become something worth keeping. And, it usually does, eventually something takes hold. But I am just as, as much as anyone, I sort of worry that maybe like I've lost all my inspiration and talent and, it's never coming back and whatever. And then something good happens and I remember, oh yeah, this is what it's like. Eventually you get it right.
Any more questions? I think we're all set. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Thanks so much to everyone for coming.
This was wonderful.
And I'll be signing books too.
There are books for sale up at the